Welcome to the Immersion Zone. Today, we're doing a deep dive into the economics of being a dive instructor. Can you earn a living as a dive instructor? Well, don't hold your breath.
Living the dream as a scuba diving instructor. Cool, but is it a dream job? Today we're taking a deep dive into a career often wrapped in these romantic notions of crystal clear waters and endless sunshine. We're talking about scuba diving instructors, and we're going to unpack the financial realities, the real nuts and bolts of this profession. Our source, a comprehensive worldwide survey. This was done by the Business of Diving Institute and analyzed by Darcy Kieran.
Yeah, and what's really fascinating here is how these survey results comparing 2019 and 2024, they really illustrate the economic landscape for dive pros globally. And just to be clear for everyone listening, while it was a worldwide survey, all the figures we'll talk about have been converted into US dollars. Just makes comparing things easier.
Okay, perfect. So let's unpack this and see if the dream job really lives up to the hype or if maybe the financial waters are, well, a bit shallow. Let's start big picture. What are instructors actually earning, and how's that changed recently?
Well, the numbers, they paint a pretty clear trend, unfortunately. For recreational instructors, the average annual income was sitting around $9,000 back in 2019. But by 2024, that actually dropped to about $8,300.
So nearly an 8% decrease,
Yeah.
less money right off the bat.
Exactly.
And what about for those in the more specialized world of technical diving,
Yeah.
tech instructors?
So tech diving instructors, they definitely earn more. Their average was around $29,900 in 2019, but they also saw a decline. It dropped to about $27,600 in 2024.
Okay, so that's also nearly an 8% drop. Interesting that it's a similar percentage across both groups.
Yeah, it is.
But here's where it gets maybe a bit more nuanced. Did this drop in income happen because they taught fewer students, or was something else going on?
That's where the story really diverges. It's quite different. For recreational instructors, well, despite their income going down, they actually trained more students. They went from teaching about 40 students per year in 2019 up to 45 in 2024.
More students, but less money overall.
Precisely. And if we connect this to the bigger picture, it means that even though they're doing more teaching, recreational instructors saw their average income per student go down. It declined by about 18%, from roughly $226 per student to just $185.
Wow. Well, it raises a big question about how their time and expertise are being valued, doesn't it?
It really does. It suggests, maybe a squeeze on prices or value in that part of the market.
Running faster just to stay in place, or even fall behind slightly. Okay, so more work, less pay per person.
Yeah.
What about the tech instructors? Did they also teach more students?
No, completely the opposite for tech. They actually saw a pretty significant 30% decline in the number of students they trained. It went from about 83 students down to 58 per year.
Okay, fewer students. So their income per student must have dropped too.
Surprisingly, no. Despite teaching fewer people, their income per student increased substantially, by 32% actually. It jumped from about $363 to $478 per student.
Huh. So fewer clients, but charging significantly more per client. That suggests a really different market dynamic, maybe more niche, more specialized?
Exactly. It points towards maybe a higher perceived value or less price sensitivity in the tech diving training market.
That really highlights the difference. Okay, now, for anyone out there maybe thinking about becoming an instructor, here's where it gets really interesting. The upfront investment. It's not exactly cheap to get into this field, is it?
Oh, definitely not. The financial commitment just to get certified and equipped, it's substantial. For recreational instructors, the survey showed the average spent just on training was about $14,400.
$14,000.
Yeah.
Just for the training courses.
Yeah. And then you have to add the gear, another $18,000 on average for essential equipment.
So carry the one. That's about $32,500 total investment.
Around that, yes. 32.5. Imagine you're putting down the cost of like a small car before you've even earned your first teaching dollar.
That is a huge sum. It immediately makes you ask, how long does it possibly take to earn that back, especially with the average incomes we just talked about?
Right.
And for tech instructors, I'm guessing that number is even higher, given the specialized gear and all?
Oh, significantly higher. Tech instructors invested, on average, around $45,000 in training.
$45,000.
And another $67,500 in gear.
Wow.
So you're looking at a total investment of about $112,600.
Over $100,000. Okay, so while they earn more per student, the barrier to entry is just massive, almost 4 times higher.
Exactly. A much bigger initial outlay.
That kind of investment really makes you wonder about the long-term picture. What about those who really commit, like full-time instructors? Is the income more sustainable then?
Well, let's look. For full-time recreational instructors, the average income was around $22,900 in 2024. Now, that's actually down about 8% from $24,900 in 2019. So still that downward trend.
Still down. Okay, 23,000-ish. And full-time tech instructors.
They earn more, about $45,400 in 2024, but that was a steeper drop for them, down 15.5% from $53,700 in 2019.
15.5%. That's quite a hit for the full-timers in tech.
It is.
So, okay, let's put that full-time recreational number, say $23,000, into perspective. If you compare that to the U.S. poverty line for one person, which is around 15,000, it seems possible, to make a living. Barely, maybe. But you are sailing pretty close to the wind there.
Dangerously close, yeah. And that's after you've made that huge $32,000 investment we talked about.
Right. It really paints a stark picture of the dream job reality for a lot of people dedicating their life to this.
Yeah, it does. It really underscores that for many, especially full-time, this career path is probably driven much more by passion than by significant financial rewards.
Let's dive a bit deeper into the data then.
Yeah.
Explore some of the nuances. Who earns what based on different factors? First up, instructors versus instructor trainers, the people who train the instructors. You'd think they'd earn quite a bit more, right?
You would think so, but interestingly, the survey showed instructor trainers actually saw a larger income drop than regular instructors. Their earnings fell about 10.4%, down to around $34,900. Meanwhile, regular instructors saw a much smaller drop, just 1.2%, ending up around $11,200.
Huh. Less of a drop for instructors, but a lower overall average, obviously. And the investment for trainers is way higher, too, isn't it?
Oh, absolutely. We're talking a total investment training plus gear of around $140,000 for a trainer.
$140,000, compared to about $40,000 for a regular instructor.
Exactly. So it's a much, much bigger initial commitment, and yet they experienced a harder hit in terms of recent income trends. It seems like a high-stakes part of the industry.
Definitely high stakes.
Yeah.
Okay, what about gender? Does the diving world escape the pay gap we see elsewhere?
Unfortunately, no. The data shows female instructors are still earning significantly less, about $15,000 on average in 2024. That compares to male instructors, who earn about $20,600.
So still a gap of over $5,000. Has it changed at all since 2019?
The gap has narrowed slightly, but yeah, it's clearly still there, a persistent issue.
Disappointing. Okay, now let's look at training agencies, the big names. Does it matter which banner you teach under? For your wallet, I mean.
It seems to, yeah. The survey had enough responses to look closely at the three. Petty instructors reported earning about $19,800 annually. SSI instructors came in a bit higher, around $22,700, and TD-SDI instructors were at the top among these three, averaging about $26,200.
So a noticeable difference there. TD-SDI highest, Petty lowest of the three. Any difference in the trend?
Yes, and this was interesting too. Petty instructors saw the largest percentage income decrease between 2019 and 2024, down about 13.5%.
13.5% drop for Petty instructors.
Wow. So yeah, the agency choice looks like it can be pretty impactful on earnings.
According to this data, yes.
How about where you live and work? Location, location, location. Does a sunny tropical spot guarantee more income, or is it more complex?
It's definitely more complex. The regional differences are quite stark, actually. Instructors in the U.S., for instance, saw a really significant decline. Nearly 28% drop in income, down to $19,000 on average.
Ouch. Down 28%. Yeah. But then on the flip side, Western Europe actually saw income growth, over a 20% increase, bringing their average up to $19,800.
So similar average income to the U.S. in 2024, but trending in opposite directions.
Exactly. And if you're looking for generally higher earnings, Mexico, Central America, and the Caribbean region stood out. They saw growth of nearly 7%, reaching an average of about $36,700. That's one of the highest earning regions.
$36,000. Okay, that sounds more like a sustainable income.
It does. But then you look at, say, the South Pacific and Indo-Pacific regions, and they saw a decrease of over 12%. down to about 15,800.
15.8. So yeah, it's not just about sunshine. Local market dynamics, cost of living, competition.
Yeah,
It all plays a huge role.
absolutely. A very mixed global picture.
Fascinating. Okay, what about years of experience? Usually more time in a job means more pay. Does that hold true here?
Well, this is where it gets crucial and maybe a bit counterintuitive. Instructors with less than 5 years of experience, they actually saw an income increase, about 12.6% up to an average of $7,700.
An increase. But $7,700,
Yeah,
that's incredibly low.
it is. Many instructors in the survey described earnings at that level as being below minimum wage. And, this data point, especially for the newer instructors, seeing an increase but still earning so little, it really points strongly towards that first observation we wanted to make. There seems to be significant downward pressure on instructor income overall, and it feels like it can only be related to an oversupply of instructors, particularly newer ones flooding the market. Combine that with maybe a lack of marketing differentiation between instructors or schools, and what happens? Competition shifts primarily to price, not necessarily quality or value.
Right, so newer people come in, may be willing to work for less just to get experience, and that pulls down the potential earnings for everyone. That makes sense. What about the more experienced folks then? Those with 5 years or more?
Their incomes went down. Those with 5 to 9 years of experience saw an 18% drop, down to about $18,500. And instructors with 10 or more years, they experienced about a 6.6% drop, down to $27,200.
So while having more experience does generally mean higher absolute income, the trend for experienced instructors is still negative, just like the overall picture.
Exactly. Sticking with it doesn't automatically guarantee your pay keeps going up, unfortunately.
So much for that idea. Now, speaking of experience, did the survey look at age or generation? Any interesting findings there?
It did for 2024. We couldn't directly compare it to 2019 because the categories changed slightly in the survey. But in 2024, the generation earning the most were those born between 1955 and 1964. That's sometimes called Boomers or Generation Jones. Their average income was around $27,600.
Okay. And one last factor that seemed maybe surprising. Independent instructors versus those working for a dive center. Does going it alone actually pay better?
It appears so, based on this survey. Independent instructors reported earning about $22,500 on average. That's actually better than instructors working for a dive center, who averaged about $16,700.
16.7 versus 22.5. That is surprising, especially since you often hear about agencies prioritizing dive centers.
It is. It might suggest that independents perhaps have more flexibility. Maybe they find niche markets, or perhaps dive centers rely on, lower paid staff instructors. Could be a mix of things.
Interesting. Okay, so putting all this data together,
Yeah.
what does it mean for that dream job idea? You mentioned sentiment earlier.
Yeah, this is really telling. When instructors were directly asked, is teaching scuba diving a viable career? Only 38.3% said yes in the latest survey.
38%.
And that's a huge drop from 2021, when 53.2% said yes.
Wow, from over half thinking it's viable down to just over a third in just a few years. That's a massive shift in perception from within the industry itself.
It really is. It speaks volumes about the financial pressures people are feeling, and it raises that crucial question, who can actually make a decent living doing this? If you synthesize all the data points, the profile that seems best positioned for a financially viable career looks something like this. You'd ideally be a full-time, independent, TDI-SDI affiliated instructor trainer teaching technical diving, probably located in a region like Mexico, Central America, or the Caribbean, and crucially, with at least 5 to 10 years of experience under your belt.
That is incredibly specific. That narrows the dream path down considerably, doesn't it? That profile fits hardly anyone.
Exactly. It highlights how challenging the economics are for the vast majority of instructors who don't tick all those boxes.
Let's bring this data to life a bit more. What were the specific challenges and frustrations that instructors themselves mentioned in the survey? What were their biggest pain points?
Well, number one, overwhelmingly, it was simply making enough money to cover basic expenses. Dealing with consistently low wages. This wasn't just a minor issue, it came up again and again.
Just fundamentally not earning enough. And you mentioned price competition earlier. That came through strongly too.
Absolutely. Instructors talked a lot about constantly battling other instructors or dive schools who are competing solely on price, driving everything down.
And concerns about the training itself.
Yeah, some specific concerns about paid e-courses, for example, feeling they're too compressed time-wise. And also this growing trend of online training reducing that essential time with the instructor.
Hmm. And it sounds like that oversupply issue you mentioned really hits home at the dive shop level.
It does. Many instructors reported there just being too many instructors rostered at their shops, which inevitably dilutes the number of students each person gets to teach.
Fewer students per instructor.
Right.
And then there are the costs to the instructor.
Yes, the high costs of annual agency dues, liability insurance, making it really hard for many to even break even before they've taught a single course.
That sounds tough. And underlying all this, was there a feeling about how they're valued?
Very much so. A strong sentiment came through about not feeling valued as professionals, feeling like they're expected to do it purely for the passion, for the love of diving, not because it's a financially sound career choice.
Almost like their passion is being exploited to justify low pay.
Some instructors definitely express that feeling, yes, like they're providing a service almost out of goodwill to the dive shops or the industry.
This really feeds into that second key observation we wanted to highlight based on what many respondents were saying.
Right. If you connect all these dots, the low pay, the high volume of instructors, the costs, many instructors feel the system is set up so that the dive training agencies make their money through sheer volume. High prices for training materials, certification fees, constantly certifying more and more instructors. That's the agency business model. But the dive professionals on the ground, the instructors doing the actual teaching, they suffer from this very volume. It leads directly to that oversupply problem, depressing wages, and making it harder to earn a living, just as the survey results clearly show.
So the structure that helps the agencies grow might actually be hurting the instructors financially, a real paradox.
It seems to be perceived that way by many instructors, yes, a systemic issue.
And some of the additional comments, the sort of final thoughts from instructors in the survey, they really hammered these points home, didn't they?
They were incredibly candid. Some instructors explicitly described the industry or parts of it as feeling like an MLM scam.
Yeah.
Multi-level marketing, where only the organizations at the top, the training agencies, really make decent money.
That's a strong statement.
It is. And there was palpable frustration, particularly aimed at agencies like PADI, regarding the high prices for student materials, exams, which instructors often have to pass on or absorb.
And this idea that the working conditions wouldn't fly elsewhere.
Yeah, a number of comments suggested that the training associations, perhaps indirectly, promote working conditions, low pay, long hours, reliance on passion that would simply be considered unacceptable in most other professional fields.
The feeling that dive shops are banking on instructors' love for diving to keep wages low.
That came through very strongly. And the difficulty of competing if you're not in one of those low-cost tropical hubs. If you're trying to teach in, say, Europe or North America, where the cost of living is high, competing with rock-bottom prices elsewhere is incredibly challenging.
And the conclusion, for many, seems to be, you just can't rely on instructing alone.
That was a common thread, the need to have other skills, another job, a spouse with a good income, or some other source of financial support, because for most, dive instructing by itself just isn't sustainable long term.
There's that one really blunt quote, too.
Yeah, quite a few blunt ones, but one stated 90% of instructors are cheap slaves and directly linked it to there being too many instructors on the market, placing some of the blame on agencies like PAFATI for churning them out.
Wow. Those are really powerful, raw insights directly from people working in the field. It paints a picture far removed from the glossy brochures.
Absolutely. It shows the depth of the financial struggle and the level of frustration for many.
What a deep dive this has been. It's really clear that while the passion for scuba diving, the love for being underwater and sharing it, runs incredibly deep for instructors, the financial waters they navigate are often, well, quite shallow. There's a significant gap between the dream and the day-to-day economic reality for many.
It truly raises a fundamental question, doesn't it? The entire dive industry's business model, at least as it impacts its frontline professionals, it seems fundamentally broken. For those of you listening who want to explore this more, maybe look into potential ways forward, possible solutions to these systemic problems, you might want to check out some of the solutions proposed by the Business of Diving Institute and Darcy Kieran. You can find those at businessofdiving.com.
An important thought to ponder, whether you're considering becoming an instructor yourself or just reflecting on the often hidden economics behind the activities we love. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive into the real-world finances of being a scuba diving instructor.
Thanks for being with us today. Please subscribe, wherever you're listening to this or at businessofdiving.com. Dive safe